The SNP under siege. Their leaders forced to deny it's a criminal enterprise after the latest arrest. Treasurer Colin Beattie was detained by police this morning as part of the widening investigation into the SNP's finances. For Humza Yousaf, it is an increasingly awkward situation.
Really difficult, really challenging. Of course, any new leader, any new First Minister doesn't want to have to be dealing with these challenges. But what I'm focused on is the priorities of the Scottish people.
Well, it is just the latest blow to the once mighty SNP that's already seen its chief executive arrested and the home he shares with wife Nicola Sturgeon searched. So what next for the pro-independence party? Also tonight, new protections for the over 85s on prepayment energy meters. But has the government broken its promise to the most vulnerable? The pensioner mauled to death in her own garden. Today, the owner of the 2 American bulldogs that killed her admits they were out of control. The appalling disparity that means more Black and Asian mums die in childbirth, and how racism's more to blame than was thought. And when the camera does lie, how a photographer won a prize for this picture before revealing AI was the actual artist.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mary Nightingale.
Good evening. Scotland's First Minister, Humza Yousaf, was forced to deny his party is a criminal enterprise today, as the SNP was rocked by the arrest of its treasurer. Colin Beattie was detained this morning by police as part of an investigation into the party's funding and finances. It is the latest scandal to hit the SNP, which has been in turmoil since Nicola Sturgeon quit in February. Her successor, Mr Yousaf, had hoped to use today to reset his government's priorities. Instead, he was fighting off yet more damaging allegations. Here's our Scotland's correspondent, Peter Smith, with the latest.
To ask the First Minister what support the Scottish Government will provide to the 88 workers...
This is Colin Beattie, now the second senior member of the SNP to be arrested in as many weeks.
Musselburgh and North Berwick.
He is the Scottish National Party's treasurer, and the man who manages the money has today been questioned by police as a suspect in their investigation into SNP funds and finances. But while Colin Beattie was being questioned in a police station, the new leader was the one facing questions in public.
Of course, any new leader, any new First Minister doesn't want to have to be dealing with these challenges. But what I'm focused on is the priorities of the Scottish people. That's what I hope to be able to deliver in the Chamber.
What was the mood in the group meeting? Are people concerned?
Defiant, actually. We want to make sure this is our party. We want to make sure it's on as good and a firm a footing as possible. But of course, we're all concerned about the party and the challenges that the party faces.
The investigation relates to more than £600,000 fundraised between 2017 and 2019, supposed to be used for an independence campaign. At the end of 2019, though, SNP accounts showed the party had just under £97,000 in the bank. There had been no independence referendum, so questions were asked about where the money had gone. At this point, Colin Beattie was party treasurer. He was replaced for a short period in 2020 before returning in 2021. Then, 18 months ago, Police Scotland launched Operation Branchform, an official investigation into the funds and finances of the SNP.
What's the mood in the SNP just now?
Obviously, these are difficult days for the SNP, but we're focused on supporting the First Minister.
It needs to be addressed. It needs to be addressed very soon, and I believe it will be, and that's something that I myself brought up.
Are you being told to expect further arrests?
No, definitely not.
Notably missing from Holyrood today was Nicola Sturgeon. She's staying away after police searched her home 2 weeks ago and arrested her husband, former SNP Chief Executive Peter Murrell. He was questioned as a suspect, then released without charge. The same day SNP headquarters were searched, police seen taking items away in bags. There was no police tent at Colin Beattie's house today, but his arrest overshadowed what was supposed to be Humza Yousaf's first big speech on policy.
The Scottish Government is today publishing their policy prospectus, New Leadership, a fresh start for Scotland.
He might want a fresh start, but scandal is the word he kept hearing back today.
He is not now running a functioning government. This is an SNP that is
A crisis tearing through the SNP, and it's a crisis now inherited by Nicola Sturgeon's replacement.
So, Peter, can Mr Youssef and more broadly, can the SNP itself actually survive this scandal, do you think?
Well, never before, Mary, has any major political party in the UK and the serving party of government faced what the SNP is going through right now. We're talking about a former chief executive, the current serving party treasurer, arrested and considered suspects in a police investigation. Now, the latest update from Police Scotland told us that Colin Beattie is still being questioned by police. Of course, 2 weeks ago, Nicola Sturgeon's husband, Peter Murrell, was released without charge after almost 12 hours of questioning. But in that fortnight that's passed, we've heard some of the developments in this investigation. A motorhome seized from Peter Murrell's mother's address. We've heard that the SNP haven't had auditors since September last year. They had auditors quit, and we don't know why, but we do know that they have not been able to find anyone willing to audit their accounts since September last year. Again, officially, we don't know why. The words scandal and crisis are often overused in politics, but in this case, it is measured. We knew that the legacy of Nicola Sturgeon's era would loom large over Humza Yousaf. We didn't know it would loom large in this way. He is pleading for a fresh start, but the next step in this investigation, an ongoing investigation, is a report will be submitted to Scotland's Public Prosecution Service.
Peter Smith at Holyrood, thank you. Now, Labour has accused the government of breaking a promise to protect vulnerable energy customers. It followed the decision by the energy regulator, Ofgem, to only ban the forced installation of prepayment meters on the over 85s. Now, all UK suppliers have agreed to a new code of practice after shocking evidence emerged of British Gas forcing vulnerable people onto pay-as-you-go meters. But it's only a voluntary scheme, and campaigners say there are too many gaps which will still leave many people unprotected. Cedric Caria reports.
Michael Regan relies on an electric wheelchair to get around. But that didn't stop an energy company forcing him onto a prepayment meter last year when he fell into arrears. It's so expensive, it's costing him the use of his electric medical bed and his freedom.
I can't go out more than a few times, not even a few times a week, sometimes only once a week, because I can't charge my chair. I'm supposed to charge it every night, and it's maybe 3 times a week at most.
It was this undercover investigation which found debt collectors had forced their way into homes to install prepayment meters that led to a public outcry, and now to these new guidelines. And while all the energy companies have signed up to them, they're only voluntary and will only lead to a partial ban. It means forced installations will be banned for some people, but not others. If you're over 85, have a terminal illness, or have certain serious health conditions, such as chronic bronchitis, you will be exempt. For everyone else, a prepayment meter can be installed, provided your supplier has tried to contact you 10 times to visit your home to do a welfare check.
What we are seeing is a voluntary code of practice. We have questions as to what will happen to a supplier who doesn't follow the code of conduct. What are the consequences for those suppliers? So for us, there are questions around how it's enforced, and there are questions as to why they haven't gone as far as an out-and-out ban on prepayment meters where there is a disabled person in the household.
Questions are also being raised about energy firms marking their own performance.
There's no guarantee that there won't be any bad practice.
And there are a number of different things and different targets that suppliers will have to meet before they can start to install prepayment meters, and most importantly, it's much clearer now on what the expectations are.
But it's not going to stop the installation of prepayment meters for the vast majority of people, is it?
So I think that's a really good question. People are struggling to pay their bills, and prepayment meters are a really good option when it comes to avoiding unintended, unexpected bills and avoiding building up debt.
Susan Taylor was forcibly fitted with a prepayment meter after the previous tenant had died, leaving debts. Her landlord had passed over details to the energy company. She was being treated for cancer at the time.
You know, it's too little and too late. People need proper help. I mean, what with the rise of bills as well.
It'll now be up to the government to introduce a total ban. Sejal Karia, ITV News.
Prices are still rising much faster than wages. The latest snapshot of the UK labour market, published today by the Office for National Statistics, showed that high inflation continues to shrink pay packets. There's also been an increase in the number of people looking for work, and pay in the public sector has risen sharply following months of industrial action. Well, our economics editor Joel Hills is here. OK, so what do these figures actually show us?
Well, these figures, Mary, show us that across the United Kingdom, people in work are still feeling poorer. Pay in February, adjusted for inflation, was 2% lower than a year earlier, the 15th consecutive monthly fall. And the squeeze on living standards is expected, I'm afraid, to continue in the months to come. There is some good news here, though. The number of people out of work and not looking for a job has fallen again. This is encouraging because what's called economic inactivity has risen significantly in the last 3 years. But while the young are rejoining the workforce, the over 50s are not. There are 400,000 more, I beg your pardon, economically inactive people today than there were before the pandemic began. 300,000 of those are aged between 50 and 64. Last month, of course, the Chancellor designed his budget to support and incentivise people back to work. 2.5 million people in the UK say they are unable to work because they are long-term sick. This is a record level. The strikes by doctors and nurses are not the cause, of course, but resolving these pay disputes in the NHS would certainly be helpful. So, how should a central bank respond? The Bank of England, of course, has been raising interest rates because it is worried that in the face of painfully high inflation, companies are hiking prices to protect profits and workers are demanding and getting bigger pay rises. The risk here, another wave of inflation. Well, average wage growth in the private sector has eased a little, but is still running just short of 7% a year. Wage growth in the public sector has picked up pace. No surprise, really. It's now not far behind the private sector. The number of vacancies in the economy has fallen again, but there are still 1 million unfilled jobs, a very high number historically. And 1 in 4 companies in the UK say they are struggling to recruit, although last summer it was 1 in 3. All in all, it's a tricky call, but the markets, Mary, are betting that as it stands, the Bank of England will raise interest rates again next month.
OK, Joel, thank you. The chair of the Parliamentary Privileges Committee has written to the Prime Minister asking for more details about his recent childcare policy due to a potential conflict of interest with his wife's business. The Prime Minister is facing an inquiry by Parliament's standards watchdog. It's amid claims that he didn't declare his wife's shares in a childcare agency that benefited from last month's budget. Downing Street insists Mr Sunak transparently declared the shares. And more than 5,000 migrants have arrived in the UK after crossing the Channel so far this year, according to official figures. At the same point last year, the number of crossings stood at just over 6,300. A man has admitted being in charge of 2 dangerous American bulldogs, which escaped through a fence and mauled an elderly pensioner to death. 85-year-old Lucille Downer was attacked in the garden of her home near Birmingham in April 2021. Today, Darren Pritchard admitted being responsible for the out-of-control dogs. Our correspondent Ben Chapman is at Wolverhampton Crown Court. I mean, this is a horrific case, isn't it, Ben? Remind us about some of the details.
Well, that was the word the police used to describe this dog attack. They used the word horrific at the time, and the judge here today told the owner of the dogs, Darren Pritchard, to expect to go to prison for allowing his dogs to be so dangerously out of control. Lucille Downer was 85 years old. She was a retired cook and a great-grandmother. She was mauled to death, though, in the back garden of her own home, suffering multiple injuries, including a dog bite to her neck. It happened 2 years ago at her house in Rowley Regis in the West Midlands. 2 American bulldogs had got into her garden through a hole in a fence which had allowed them to escape from a neighbouring property. The police say those 2 And today, 44-year-old Darren Pritchard admitted a charge under the Dangerous Dogs Act. He also pleaded guilty to possessing cannabis with intent to supply and producing the drug at an address on Mrs. Downer's street. He was released on bail today, and outside court he was asked if he had anything to say to Mrs. Downer's family. He replied that he would say all he had to say at his sentencing hearing, but he also said that he had sent his condolences to her family. Mrs. Downer's granddaughter was in court today. She was overheard saying that she was close to tears when she learned that Pritchard was intending to plead guilty. This offence carries a maximum sentence of 14 years. The judge said that Pritchard would receive a discount, a reduction in his sentence because he'd pleaded guilty. That sentencing hearing will be next month.
OK, Ben Chapman in Wolverhampton, thank you. Free-range eggs will be back on the shelves within days as bird flu restrictions are lifted across the UK. Poultry, like hens and other captive birds, no longer need to be housed. Now, it is, of course, a relief for some farmers, but not all of them are happy to release their birds, with some fearing it is not yet safe, as our consumer editor Chris Choi reports.
Cranking open doors that have been closed for months. Chickens at this farm in Norfolk, reared for meat, can once again range free.
Today is a really fantastic day for us in that the restrictions are being lifted.
Now that things have normalised in this industry, do you think we might see chicken meat prices coming down a bit?
I don't think we will see prices come down. We're suffering the same as everybody else with huge cost increases. One price comes down and another one goes up, so we sort of maintain the status quo.
Poultry lockdowns due to bird flu risk started in November, affecting England, Wales and Northern Ireland. Today, they were lifted. More than 7 million captive birds have died or been culled during the bird flu outbreak. In some areas, the birds' lockdown continues due to higher infection dangers. Since February, all produce laid by free-range hens in England has been labelled barn eggs. That will now change.
Keeping birds inside for 5 months became known as flockdown, a response to the UK's largest ever outbreak of bird flu. And yet, despite today's easing of restrictions, the virus is still circulating, and so some farmers have decided still not to let their chickens out.
While these hens could now be let out, the farmer believes risks in his area of East Anglia remain too high.
When you've got something as deadly and as virulent as bird flu out in their ranges, it's just not practical or common sense for me to do, put them in their jeopardy.
While bird flu is low risk for humans and for food safety, it has affected choice and prices in the shops. It's reduced egg production, which has kept average prices around 20% higher than a year ago.
On staple goods such as eggs, bread and milk, we're trying to stay away from putting the price up to the consumer, and we're absorbing those costs. Hopefully now that those restrictions have been lifted, we will be able to get some more supply in and we can get over this bit of a shortage.
Bird flu infections lessen in spring and summer, but as many migrating species now come to the UK for nesting, many fear our chicken flocks have not yet seen the last of these lockdowns. Chris Choi, DanTV News in Suffolk.
Well, there is lots more still to come on the ITV Evening News, including America's Fox News is up in court over its coverage suggesting the last presidential election was rigged.
It's the first British-born South Asian player to play in the Premier League.
We will bring you a special report on efforts to get more South Asian footballers to the top of the game. And we will bring you all that and much more after the break. Join me then. And welcome back. Now, the government was warned today that it has underestimated the role of racism in what it was told was the appalling disparity which sees more black or Asian women die during or after childbirth than white women. The Commons Women and Equalities Committee says one of its biggest concerns is staffing shortages on maternity wards. Our correspondent Stacey Foster heard from two mothers who feel that they were discriminated against when they were giving birth.
Shannon White gave birth to a healthy baby boy in February 2021. But telling me her birth story, she remembers feeling ignored. So much so that her son arrived and her husband missed the whole experience.
I know that I was the only woman of colour on that ward at the time. And there were women there that were making, you know, a lot of noise, and they were pressing the buzzer a lot and stuff. And I just hadn't done that because even though the contractions were back to back, I felt like I was handling it, and I assumed that at some point, because I'd been induced as well, that at some point someone was going to come and check me again.
We already know that black women are 4 times more likely to die within 6 weeks of giving birth. This report says midwives need to acknowledge there is a disparity in the level of care and use that to improve. It says black women need to be better represented in maternal health research, and the government needs to increase the budget for maternity care to £350 million to help with staff shortages. The report also says that of the 229 women who died between 2018 and 2020, 60% of them had a pre-existing medical condition. But that isn't the only reason black and Asian women are dying more frequently. Candice Brathwaite wrote a book about her experiences of childbirth and is frustrated that little progress has been made.
I'm tired of reports. Someone gets paid to write a report and regurgitate information we already know. People still die. People aren't believed. Black women are told that the pain is in their heads.
Former midwife Donna Ockenden has written multiple reports about failing maternity services in Shrewsbury and Nottingham. After reading the Black Maternal Health Review, she says action must be taken.
You know, I know that the vast majority of midwives and doctors, obstetricians, anaesthetists, neonatologists, they go in every day to give of their very best. But we know across England that we don't have the workforce in place that we need. We haven't had for some time, and we don't have all the funding that we need.
The Maternity Disparities Task Force was set up to focus on how outcomes can be improved. But we know that until today, that group hadn't met for 9 months.
I think it's a mixture of racism and also understaffed, stressed employees. I think it's a mixture of that.
The government says the NHS is among the safest places to give birth in the world. But as Shannon prepares to welcome baby number 2, she knows it'll still be riskier for her. Stacey Foster, ITV News, Milton Keynes.
Well, to the United States now, and opening arguments are set to start soon in a blockbuster court case against Rupert Murdoch's Fox News. The controversial right-wing news channel is accused of spreading lies about the 2020 US presidential election. Our US correspondent Dan Rivers is in the state of Delaware, where the case is being heard. And Dan, there could be some pretty explosive evidence, couldn't there?
Yeah, I mean, this is being billed really as the trial of the decade here. In essence, what it amounts to is fake news being put on trial. Only in this case, it is Donald Trump's favoured news network, Fox News, which is being accused of spreading misinformation about the 2020 election. It's being sued by Dominion Voting Systems, which is based here in Delaware, for $1.6 billion. In essence, the judge in this trial has already said he's not going to hear any evidence as to whether the election was rigged or not. He says it wasn't. He's been very clear about that. What is at the heart of this case is whether Fox News put on air claims that Dominion's voting machine somehow flipped votes from the Republicans to the Democrats and knew that that claim was false. So in other words, did Fox knowingly lie about this with malicious intent? The witness list is quite extensive and extraordinary, really. For everyone from Rupert Murdoch himself, his son Lachlan, various senior executives at Fox News, as well as several Fox anchors themselves. And the repercussions of this case are potentially enormous. Obviously, if Dominion wins, it will be a shot across the bows for other broadcasters, other fringe broadcasters here, that if they go on and broadcast conspiracy theories that they know are false, then there could be potentially huge legal repercussions for them.
OK, fascinating stuff. Dan Rivers in Delaware, thank you. Some other news now, and fighting is continuing in areas of Sudan's capital, Khartoum, despite a ceasefire which was due to start at 6 p.m. Two rival generals at the heart of the conflict had agreed to a 24-hour humanitarian pause to allow civilians to get medical help and supplies. The Kremlin claims Russian President Vladimir Putin has visited occupied parts of the Ukrainian regions of Kherson and Luhansk. Mr. Putin is said to have attended a military command meeting there. Meanwhile, a Moscow judge has rejected an appeal from the US journalist Evan Gershkovich to be freed from detention before his trial on espionage charges. There was a standing ovation tonight for the former US President Bill Clinton as he arrived at an event marking the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement. It is taking place at the Guildhall in Londonderry, where Mr Clinton will make an address. Our political correspondent Carl Dinnan is there. And Carl, a really warm welcome for the former president then.
Yeah, which is still going on, Mary. I don't know if you can see, just behind the gentleman in the green baseball cap is Bill Clinton meeting the crowds here in Londonderry, having selfies with as many people as want a selfie. He's very happy to be here. Clearly, this is one of the scene of one of the warmest welcomes Bill Clinton had in 1995 when he became the first US president to visit Northern Ireland. The crowd in the Guildhall Square of Derry isn't quite as big today as it was then. But this city loves him and he loves this city. He has been careful throughout this visit not to stray too closely into the politics of Northern Ireland today, to be seen to be pushing the DUP too hard to go back into government. But just before he came out here this evening to come and meet these people who are delighted, as you can see, delighted to be seen with him, he did make this rather oblique comment to the crowd inside the Guildhall.
If you're having a fight in your home, you can always find an excuse to say no. If you're struggling with any kind of relationship or struggle, you can always find an excuse to say no. Getting to yes is humanity's great trial and great goal.
He also said earlier that he had met with Jeffrey Donaldson, Sir Jeffrey Donaldson, the leader of the DUP, yesterday, and although he wouldn't reveal the details of the conversation that they had, he did say that he left the meeting more optimistic than he had gone into the meeting in terms of what was going to happen politically here in Northern Ireland's future. But this evening, the crowd here aren't even worried about that. They're just enjoying the Clinton star power.
Carl Dinnan in Londonderry. Derry, thank you very much for that. And you may have heard the church bell ringing the hour behind Carl in sunny Londonderry. You're watching the ITV Evening News. It is just after 7 o'clock now. Here's what's still ahead before Emmerdale. Shot for ringing the wrong doorbell. A mother speaks out after her teenage son was wounded trying to pick up his younger brothers. Summer of disruption following demonstrations at the World Snooker Championships and Grand National. What protests could be planned next? Countdown to the coronation. Preparations are underway for the King's Parade. Find out why this award-winning photograph might not be all that it seems.
And I'm here at Kew Gardens, where a cool spring has helped the blossom last that bit longer. Find out why, and of course I have the national forecast in around 15 minutes.
But before all that, a special report on fresh efforts to improve the representation of South Asian footballers in the elite men's game. Less than 1% of the available players are in youth development schemes in England. That means there's a huge amount of untapped talent. And the Professional Footballers Association is trying to address it. It's hoping a new generation of stars will inspire more young people with South Asian heritage to make it to the very top of the sport. Antoine Allen heard from some of those leading the way.
From the moment English legends wrote their name in history to the heartbreak of many missed penalties, the Three Lions squads that have taken on the world have consistently lacked one group of homegrown players. Since 1986, no South Asian player has represented the Three Lions senior side. A new generation of youth players are debunking myths with the help and guidance of the PFA. At West Brom's academy, 14-year-old Danny Iqbal dreams of representing the nation.
Hopefully I'll get my call up next year. Yeah, I just want to be playing there at top level. Like, I look at these players now and I just want to be one of them when I'm older. I want to be aspiring young players.
Danny's father says the South Asian community would be proud to see players like his son reach the top of the game, especially as he believes misinformation about them has held back his community's chances of climbing the football pyramid.
South Asians were not suited to the game, and that was primarily because of their genetic makeup. Now, the genetic makeup of Asian players is much the same as genetic makeup of all players. Tall players, wide players, every type of player. So that's a myth that needs to be broken.
This season saw a 12.6% increase in the number of South Asian players at clubs in England's 4 professional leagues. There are 92 youth footballers, less than 1% of the pool of players. 25 teenagers have been selected for scholarships, but a smaller pool means representation increases to 1.45%. But at the professional level, only 17 of the nearly 4,000 players are British South Asian, less than half of 1%. Weatherman works to help clubs find and develop South Asian footballers. An injury ended his professional football career, but his brother made history in his debut for Fulham.
Zesh Raymond becomes the first British-born South Asian player to play in the Premier League.
We were told that we would never make it because we were scared of the weather, got the wrong diet, and your parents push you towards education and not sport. So when you're told at a young age, that could actually put you off. But for us, we use that as a source of inspiration.
A new scheme from the PFA called AIMS is supporting clubs across the country to find, nurture and connect talented South Asian players.
When they come in now, they will be supported, and that support is during and after their career as well.
It requires a lot of skill to be selected even for a junior academy, but to become a pro footballer is even harder. Less than 1% of these boys will ever play professional football. Under the AIMS scheme, Wolves under-21 defender Cameron Candola received mentorship from former Premier League players. As one of 5 professional South Asian players signed to a Premier League club, he wants to inspire others, even at this crucial time in his career.
If you have a good 2 years now from 18 to 20, you could see yourself playing like a Premier League level, whereas if you have a poor 2 years and can't really get it going, then you can find yourself playing like National League, non-league, and there's a big difference, and it can all just come down to sometimes what opportunities come.
Down on the south coast, Zesh Rahman is continuing to make history and break new ground. Each time Zesh walks onto the pitch at Fratton Park, he cuts a solitary but inspiring figure, as the only South Asian coach in England's top 4 leagues. As a part of Portsmouth's coaching staff, his analysis on the pitch and off of it is supporting Pompey's League One goals. Zesh, how do you feel being a role model to so many young coaches?
Well, I see it as a very privileged position because I know that a lot of people are looking up to me.
You made history on the pitch, you're making history in the dugout, but I'm sure your ambitions are even bigger than this stadium. How far do you want to go in the game?
I'd like to end up working at the highest level possible. My ultimate aim and dream is to end up working in the Premier League, and I believe that's the pinnacle as a player, and that's where, I'd like to end up as a coach.
19 years ago this week, Zesh's Premier League career began. He went on to stand alongside English football legends.
Everything that you do in the game was like a mini milestone because it was not being done by someone of my background.
So what does the football world need to do to make sure you don't remain the only South Asian coach?
Well, I believe the AIMS programme is already doing it. We've got really good success stories of players transitioning from phase to phase within the academies.
If Zesh keeps winning, one day he could become the first South Asian manager in top flight football. A good result for Portsmouth and another historical match for Zesh. Every time he helps his team play a game, he makes history as a trailblazer, inspiring the next generation of South Asian coaches to know that they too can work in the sport that they love. Antoine Allen, ITV News.
Let's get a quick update now on what's making the news tonight. The Treasurer of the SNP, Colin Beattie, is being questioned by detectives in connection with a police probe into the party's finances. It is the second arrest of a senior SNP politician as part of the investigation this month. Campaign groups say new rules to restrict the forced use of prepayment meters does not go far enough to protect vulnerable customers. It comes after the energy regulator Ofgem's decision to only ban the forced installation for the over 85s. A man has pleaded guilty to being in charge of two dangerously out-of-control dogs, which killed an 85-year-old woman. Lucille Downer was fatally attacked by the American Bulldogs after they got into her garden near Birmingham in 2021. The mother of a 16-year-old boy who was shot in the head after going to the wrong house in the United States has described how he's lucky to be alive. Ralph Jarl had a bullet lodged in his head for 12 hours and is now back home receiving medical care. The Missouri homeowner who shot him, an 84-year-old man, has been charged over the shooting. The case has sparked a bitter backlash, as Martha Fairley reports.
A bright teenager and a talented musician, Ralph Jarl was shot in the head and the arm last week for simply going to the wrong address. The 16-year-old was treated in hospital and is now being given medical care at home in Kansas City.
He had the bullet in the up here for about, let's say, up to 12 hours before it was taken out. So that injury is extensive, and the residual effect of that injury is going to stay with him for quite a while.
Ralph was sent to pick up his younger twin brothers on Thursday evening from 115th Terrace, but he rang the doorbell of this house on 115th Street, now covered with graffiti. 84-year-old Andrew Lester, who lives there, has been charged with first-degree assault and armed criminal action.
My message to the community is that in Clay County, we enforce the laws and we follow the laws, and it does not matter where you come from or what you look like or how much money you have. Everyone is held to the same standard.
There has been outrage in the state of Missouri, where yesterday hundreds of protesters gathered near the spot where Ralph was shot, and almost $3 million have already been donated to pay for his medical care. But there's also been reaction from across America. Actor Halle Berry tweeted, "I'm sick and tired of this feeling. My heart completely broke when I learned this precious 16-year-old was shot in the head." While the Vice President Kamala Harris also tweeted her support, saying, "Let's be clear, no child should ever live in fear of being shot for ringing the wrong doorbell." Meanwhile, a 65-year-old man's been charged with the second-degree murder of Kaylin Gillis, killed when she drove into the wrong driveway in upstate New York. She died just days after Ralph Jarl came so close to losing his life, both shot over what appear to be innocent mistakes. Martha Fairley, ITV News.
Climate activist group Extinction Rebellion says it's planning new and inventive ways to up its controversial protests if the government ignores key demands. It could cause disruption in London this weekend, including at Sunday's marathon. Geraint Vincent's here. What are these demands and will they be met?
It's extremely unlikely that they'll be met, I think, Mary. Certainly not in the time frame that Extinction Rebellion is talking about. Two fresh demands that they describe: that the government ends all new licences, approvals and funding for fossil fuel projects, and that it creates what it describes as emergency citizens' assemblies to discuss some of those goals. Now, Extinction Rebellion wants the government to enter into negotiations about meeting these demands, and here's what their spokesperson had to say about what will happen if they don't do that.
If we don't get a response, at 10 a.m. on Tuesday, 25th of April, Extinction Rebellion will build an unprecedented coalition, stepping up our campaigns in the weeks and months ahead along three pathways. That is to picket, to stand in solidarity with the strikers, to organise locally, and to disobey.
And one of those demands about fossil fuels is very similar to that of the campaign group Just Stop Oil, who you will have seen yesterday interrupted the World Snooker Championships in particularly spectacular fashion. At the start of the year, Extinction Rebellion said they'd be stepping back from tactics of civil disobedience. Today is a warning that it's prepared to return to them. In the meantime, as you mentioned, it's organising something called The Big One. It's an event connecting music and dance around Westminster and the Houses of Parliament. Not intended as a public disruption, says Extinction Rebellion, but they are expecting around 30,000 people on the same weekend as the London Marathon takes place.
Wow. OK, Garrett, thank you. Hundreds of military personnel paraded through the streets of central London last night in preparation for the King's coronation on the 6th of May. Ian Woods is at Buckingham Palace. And Ian, it was a real taste of what's set to be a pretty spectacular show, wasn't it?
Yes, around midnight last night, the gates of the palace swung open and hundreds of military personnel on horseback emerged, went up the Mall, along Whitehall to Westminster Abbey, where King Charles and Queen Camilla will be crowned. No sign of either the modern Diamond Jubilee carriage on which they will be taken to the ceremony, or indeed the venerable Gold State coach on which they'll make the return journey, but the Household Cavalry and many others took part in last night's rehearsal. On the day itself, 6,000 soldiers, sailors and members of the Air Force will take part in the parade, plus hundreds of others from 35 Commonwealth countries. Now, it's taxpayers which will pick up the bill for the coronation, expected to be somewhere north of £50 million, but a new opinion poll out tonight suggests that more than half of the country don't think that we should pick up the tab. 51% according to YouGov, 32% disagree and think that's fair enough. The others are don't knows. But with the cost of living crisis and, of course, all these public sector strikes over pay, probably explains why so many people are concerned about the expense.
OK. Ian Woods outside Buckingham Palace. Thank you. Still to come before Emmerdale. They say, don't they, the camera never lies. But find out how one sneaky snapper hoodwinked a photography competition and won.
And I'm here at Kew Gardens, where a cool spring has helped the blossom last that bit longer. Join me for the full national forecast coming up a bit later in the programme.
OK, and that's after the break. Join me and Alex for that. See you then. And again, now the brief blast of warm weather yesterday has helped our plants and trees spring into life. So where's Alex? Kew Gardens, of course. So loads of trees and flowers coming out then.
Good evening, Mary. Yeah, that's right. However, I have to say at the moment here at Kew Gardens, it is pretty windy. There is certainly a chill in the air, and that's because we've got an easterly flow at the moment, and it is coming off the North Sea, which is quite cold. But thankfully, we do have some beautiful blossom here, as you can see, and that certainly has lifted spirits here today, because it's been quite grey across much of the southeast of the UK. However, away from here, it's been pretty fine, and as you may have heard, Scotland has seen 20 degrees plus today, so another warm day. Wouldn't be surprised if it was somewhere near there. But here at Kew Gardens, as I say, a bit cooler, but the blossom is in full bloom at the moment, and I've been catching up with a few of the gardeners who tell me that actually a cooler spring is helping the blossom last longer.
Well, to hold blossom on a tree, ideally, cool weather is best, which I know isn't quite the same for human comfort, but cool weather and relatively still days. The windy
It's actually tree pollen which is affecting many hay fever sufferers. So out towards the western fringes, it's been very high today. It is going to be very high again tomorrow. High across other parts as we push out towards the east, dropping to moderate in the far north. So you have been warned. Let's take a look at the details for the full weather forecast right now.
Today we'll see warmer temperatures moving in from the east, especially around tea time. Heinz no added sugar beans sponsors ITV National Weather.
Well, as we head through the next few days, it does stay relatively settled, so dry for many of us. Pleasant spells of sunshine where it does pop out and just watch out for the odd shower here and there, really. And if we take a look at the pressure pattern, you can see it's high pressure in control at the moment. The isobars are fairly wide apart, so it doesn't mean it will be, it means it won't be too breezy. Having said that, it's quite breezy here at the moment, but the winds are set to drop out. As for this evening and overnight, it stays relatively quiet. A bit of cloud bubbling up here and there, but where we do get those clear breaks, it will fall off quite chilly, more so across the north, so around parts of eastern Scotland, maybe down to 1 degree in places, cold enough for maybe a patchy frost actually, but that will thaw away pretty quickly as we get into tomorrow. Away from here, temperatures not as chilly, particularly where we do keep the cloud cover. Now, as we start tomorrow, it could be a little cloudy in places, but don't worry, it will start to brighten up for many of us. And in fact, tomorrow it's a reversal in fortunes. It's going to be eastern parts and the southeast which sees the best of the sunshine as we head into the afternoon. Temperatures here, though, because of that easterly flow coming in off the North Sea, will be a little cooler. So despite the sunshine, a little cooler, but still pleasant, I have to say. However, out towards the west and northwest in particular, that's when we could see temperatures getting up to maybe 17, 18 degrees Celsius, which is above average for the time of year. It's a similar day as we push on to Thursday. Thursday, maybe temperatures dropping by a degree or so, but the sunshine will evenly spread. That's your forecast.
Heinz no added sugar beans sponsors ITV National Weather.
Well, that's it from Kew Gardens. I have to say the blossom's still looking pretty good, but this wind is starting to blow just a few of the petals off. Back to you.
All right, Alex, thank you. And finally tonight, the phony photograph that's questioning what is and what isn't art. German photographer Boris L. Dagson created a picture using only artificial intelligence. Now, he entered it into a prestigious international photography competition, and his surprise and concern, he won. Our correspondent Rachel Townsend reports on a very modern image problem.
The image that could have been prize-winning, but wasn't, thanks to a confession from the German photographer behind it. Boris Elgardson, who studied photography across Europe, said he submitted this picture at the Sony World Photography Awards to see if competitions are prepared for AI entries.
I did it as a test, as a hacker who is checking a system to find a weak spot, not to exploit it, but to say, hey, there's something you need to do about it.
Lizzie Worley is a portrait photographer and says the industry isn't overly worried now, but is conscious of where AI may lead.
How easy is it to generate an image exclusively through AI?
Well, surprisingly easy, actually. This, for example, is the sort of thing I would create as a maternity portrait for somebody, for their long-term memories. However, I typed in maternity silhouette in black and white, and we are laughing about it at the moment because it's really not doing a very good job, as you can see. But the technology is in its infancy and it's learning, and as an industry we do have concerns about where it's getting its source of images from.
And the focus of AI stretches beyond photography. This week, AI cloned the voices of musicians Drake and The Weeknd to create this track. Put together by a user known as Ghostwriter, it was viewed and streamed over 15 million times before being taken down. For Boris and his almost winning photograph, it was job done.
It needs to be an open discussion. Now the conversation has started, and that's all I wanted.
He got his conversation, but it cost him the glory. Rachel Townsend, ITV News.
And just before we go, an apology. We incorrectly named the Scottish Labour leader at the start of the programme. He is, of course, Anas Sarwar. Sorry for that. Tom's here at 10 from the Evening News team, and all of us here. Bye-bye.